What if a single phone call had the power to bring an entire Boeing 737 to a screeching halt? Not a bomb threat. Not a mechanical failure, but a father's last resort against injustice. This is the true-life drama of Damian Mercer, a successful black single dad, flying first class with his young son. He was ready for a dream vacation, but instead he was singled out, humiliated, and repeatedly asked for his ID by a flight attendant who couldn't believe he belonged. She pushed him, questioned his integrity, and tried to make him small. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. This isn't just a story about a cancelled flight. It's a story of karma served at 30,000 feet, where one man's dignity grounded an entire airline. The low, resonant hum of the Celestial Airlines flagship lounge at JFK was a symphony of quiet success. It was a sound Damian Mercer had worked his entire life to hear. Polished marble floors reflected the soft, recessed lighting. The clinking of ice in glasses and the hushed tones of business travelers formed the backdrop to what was supposed to be the first chapter of a perfect memory. Beside him, 8-year-old Jalen's eyes were as wide as the panoramic windows overlooking the tarmac. His small fingers, usually smudged with graphite from his drawing pads, were pristine. He was wearing the new navy blue blazer Damian had bought him for the occasion, a miniature version of his own. "Dad, is that our plane?" Jalen whispered. His breath fogging a small circle on the glass, he pointed towards a colossal Boeing 777 being attended to by a ground crew that looked like ants from their second-story perch. Damian smiled, a deep, genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's the one, champ. Celestial Flight 88 to London. Our ride to see the castles." For Damian, this trip was more than a vacation. It was a coronation. A single father since Jalen's mother had passed away from a sudden illness 4 years prior. He had poured every ounce of his being into two things, his son and his architecture firm. He'd built his company Mercer Designs from a spare bedroom dream into a celebrated firm that reshaped city skylines. He'd won awards, graced magazine covers, and secured contracts that other architects would trade their T-squares for. Yet this moment felt like his greatest achievement. Flying first class to Europe with his son was the physical manifestation of a promise he had made to his late wife, a promise to show their boy the world. Their boarding group was called, and Damian placed a guiding hand on Jalen's shoulder. They walked past the gate agent, who gave them a warm, professional smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Mercer." Stepping onto the plane was like entering a different world. The first-class cabin of Celestial Airlines was an oasis of muted tones, brushed metal and expansive personal pods. A flight attendant with blonde hair, pulled back into a severe tight bun, greeted them at the entrance. Her name tag read Caroline. Her smile was a thin, practiced line that didn't quite reach her pale blue eyes. "Welcome aboard," she said, her gaze flicking from Damian's ticket to his face, then to Jalen's. It was a flicker so brief, so subtle, that anyone else might have missed it. But Damian didn't. He was an architect of human spaces. He understood the silent language of environments and the people within them. He'd encountered that look before, the momentary, cognitive dissonance in the eyes of someone whose reality was being subtly challenged. "Good morning, Damian," replied his voice, calm and warm. "We're in 2A and 2B. May I see your boarding passes again, please?" Caroline asked. Her tone was professionally sweet, but a dissonant note lay underneath. Damian obliged without complaint, pulling the crisp documents from his jacket pocket. She studied them for a beat too long, her eyes tracing the names Damian Mercer, Jalen Mercer, before handing them back. "Right this way." They settled into their pods, marvels of modern travel. Jalen immediately began exploring the buttons, his face lighting up, as the privacy screen rose and the seat reclined into a bed. Damian watched him, his heart swelling. This was all for him. As passengers continued to board, Caroline returned. "Sir, I'll need to see a form of identification, please." Damian paused. He'd already shown his ID to get through security and his boarding pass at the gate, and again upon entry. This felt redundant. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely. "Just need to verify the name on the ticket, sir." "Standard procedure," she said, her smile unwavering. Damian suppressed a sigh. He knew it wasn't standard procedure to re-verify an ID once a passenger was seated, not unless there was a specific issue. But he didn't want a scene. He didn't want anything to mar this moment for Jalen. He pulled out his wallet and handed her his driver's license. She took it, her manicured nails tapping against the plastic. She held it up, comparing the photo to his face, then to the name on a tablet she was carrying. It was an exaggerated performance of scrutiny. "Damian Mercer," she murmured, as if tasting an unfamiliar word. Finally, she handed it back. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." She turned and walked away. Damian took a deep breath, the sterile, filtered air of the cabin suddenly feeling heavy. He looked at Jalen, who was now happily engrossed in the animated movie selection, oblivious to the strange little interaction. Damian hoped it would be the last. He was wrong. The cabin doors were sealed. The safety demonstration had concluded, and the gentle push of the aircraft moving away from the gate signaled the true start of their journey. Damian began to relax, allowing the pre-departure tension to dissolve. He ordered a ginger ale for himself and an orange juice for Jalen, and they toasted, clinking their glasses together. "To castles and kings," Jalen said, his voice full of 8-year-old gravity. "To castles and kings," Damian echoed, his smile returning. The peace lasted for 20 minutes. They were climbing through 15,000 feet when Caroline returned to their pod. She was holding her tablet again. "Mr. Mercer." She began, her voice a little louder this time, a little more performative. A few of the other first-class passengers glanced over. "I'm sorry to bother you again, but my system is flagging an issue with your ticket. I need to see your identification one more time." Damian stared at her. The polite facade was beginning to crack. "You just checked my ID less than half an hour ago. What seems to be the problem? The system is showing a potential name mismatch. It's a security protocol." "I just need to verify it again," she insisted. The sweetness in her tone was gone, replaced by a brittle authority. A woman in seat 3D, a sharp-looking brunette in a business suit, lowered her newspaper slightly, her eyes peering over the top. Damian's jaw tightened. This was no longer a subtle microaggression. This was harassment, plain and simple. He could feel the familiar hot sting of anger, but he pushed it down. For Jalen, he had to handle this with grace. "There is no mismatch," Damian said, his voice low and steady, trying to keep the exchange private. "My name is Damian Mercer. My son's name is Jalen Mercer. The tickets, my passport, and my driver's license all say the same thing. What name is your system showing?" Caroline faltered for a second, her eyes darting away. She hadn't expected to be challenged with logic. "It's a technical glitch, sir. If you could just show me your ID, we can clear it up." He knew it was a lie. He knew there was no glitch. The glitch was in her perception, in her inability to reconcile the sight of a black man and his son in seats that cost more than a month of her salary. But Jalen was looking at him now, His movie forgotten, his brow furrowed with confusion. With a deep, controlled breath, Damian reached for his wallet again. He handed her his passport, this time the blue booklet heavy with stamps from his business trips to Dubai, Tokyo, and Singapore. An object that screamed of a life lived globally. She took it and made another show of examining it, turning the pages slowly. It was a power play, and they both knew it. "See Damian Mercer," he said, pointing to the page. "No mismatch. I'll need to take this to the purser to verify," she said, snapping the passport shut. "No," Damian said, his voice dropping an octave. The warmth was gone, replaced by steel. "You will not take my passport. You can verify it right here in front of me." The cabin was now silent, save for the hum of the engines. The woman in 3D had put her newspaper down entirely. An older man in 1A was now openly staring. Caroline's face flushed a blotchy red. Her authority had been publicly challenged. "Sir, if you're unwilling to cooperate with the flight crew," she began, her voice rising in pitch. "I am cooperating," Damian cut in his voice, still dangerously low. "I have shown you my boarding pass twice. I have shown you my driver's license. I have now shown you my passport. You, on the other hand, seem to be incapable of doing your job without harassing me. Now please return my passport." Caroline, cornered and embarrassed, practically threw the passport back at him. "We'll see about this," she muttered under her breath, before turning on her heel and marching towards the front galley, her footsteps sharp and angry. Jalen looked up at his father, his bottom lip trembling slightly. "Dad, why is she mad at us? Did we do something wrong?" Damian's heart broke. He pulled his son into a one-armed hug, his carefully constructed world of joy and security now pierced by the ugly familiar sting of prejudice. "No, buddy. No, we did absolutely nothing wrong. Sometimes people just make mistakes." He knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And he was beginning to realize that this was a battle he wouldn't be able to de-escalate. Part 3. An unexpected ally. The air in the first-class cabin grew thick with unspoken words. The brief, sharp exchange had shattered the illusion of serene luxury. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, the quiet hum of the Rolls-Royce engines now seeming to amplify the tension. Damian focused on Jalen, trying to draw him back into the world of animated heroes and happy endings. But he could feel the weight of eyes on him. He felt like an exhibit, the problem in seat 2A. A few minutes later, Caroline returned, but she wasn't alone. She was followed by a stern-looking man in his late 50s with silver-grey hair and a jacket adorned with the insignia of a head flight attendant or purser. His name tag read, Gregory. Mr. Mercer. Gregory began, his voice devoid of any warmth. He stood over Damian's pod, a clear physical intimidation tactic. Caroline stood just behind him, a smug, vindicated look on her face. "My colleague Ms. Finch informs me that you are being uncooperative." The use of Caroline's surname, Finch, felt formal and deliberate, an immediate alignment of the crew against the passenger. "That's an interesting interpretation," Damian said, refusing to be cowed. He didn't raise his voice. He matched Gregory's calm, professional tone, a move that subtly disarmed the purser's aggressive posture. "I've provided my identification 3 separate times. What I was uncooperative about was allowing Ms. Finch to walk away with my passport. I believe that's my right." Before Gregory could respond, a clear, confident voice cut through the tension from across the aisle. He's absolutely correct. All heads turned to seat 3D. The woman with the newspaper was now leaning forward, her intelligent, focused gaze fixed on the purser. "My name is Elizabeth Warren. I'm an attorney. I've been sitting here listening to this entire exchange. Not only is Mr. Mercer within his rights to not let a federal document out of his sight, but the repeated requests for his identification without any stated credible cause are bordering on harassment and profiling." She spoke with an effortless authority that immediately changed the dynamic in the cabin. She wasn't emotional. She was stating facts. Gregory's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a crew matter. It became my matter when your crew member decided to repeatedly single out and question a passenger in a manner I have never witnessed in over 20 years of flying first class." Elizabeth retorted smoothly. "I can assure you I have an excellent memory for detail. I've already made a note of the time of each incident." She subtly tapped a pen against a leather-bound notebook in her lap. Caroline Finch looked as if she'd been slapped. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a flicker of panic. This was not how this was supposed to go. She had expected to be backed up, for the problematic passenger to be chastised, perhaps even threatened with removal upon landing. She had not expected to be cross-examined by a lawyer before they'd even finished the ascent. Gregory, to his credit, seemed to realize the situation was spiraling out of his control. He shot a venomous glare at Caroline, a silent reprimand for letting it get this far. He turned back to Damian, his tone softening fractionally. "Sir, we apologize for the inconvenience. There appears to have been a misunderstanding with our systems. It won't happen again." It was a weak, dismissive apology, but it was a step back from the brink. Damian simply nodded, accepting the half-hearted truce for what it was. He glanced across the aisle at Elizabeth Warren, giving her a small, grateful nod. She returned it with a look of solidarity that spoke volumes. In that moment, he wasn't alone anymore. He had an ally, a powerful one. The purser and Caroline retreated once more. The cabin slowly settled, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. A short while later, as the seatbelt sign switched off, Elizabeth unbuckled and walked over to Damian's pod. She kept her voice low. "Are you and your son all right?" "We are. Thank you for that." Damian said, his gratitude immense. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she said firmly. "I'm Liz, by the way." What that woman was doing was inexcusable. I started recording on my phone after the second time she came over. Just audio, but it's all there, her tone, your responses, everything. Damian was stunned. This stranger had not only spoken up for him, but had the foresight to gather evidence. "Wow. Thank you, Liz." "Don't thank me yet," she said with a wry smile. "Something tells me Ms. Finch isn't the type to let things go. If she or anyone else gives you any more trouble, any at all, you let me know. We'll handle it. Together." She gave Jalen a kind smile before returning to her seat. Her intervention had been a life raft in a churning sea of hostility. But as Damian looked towards the galley, he knew Liz was right. This wasn't over. Caroline Finch had been publicly humiliated. Her prejudice had been called out and backed into a corner. A person like that doesn't retreat. They double down. The only question was how. An hour passed. The drinks and meal service began, and a fragile sense of normalcy returned. Another flight attendant, a kind-faced man named David, took over their section. He was attentive and warm, treating Damian and Jalen with the professional courtesy that should have been standard. He knelt by Jalen's seat to ask him about his movie making the little boy laugh. It was a stark contrast to Caroline, who now pointedly ignored them, her movements stiff and resentful as she served passengers on the other side of the cabin. Damian began to hope that the worst was over, that Gregory had warned Caroline off, and they could salvage the rest of the flight. But the quiet was deceptive. It was merely the prelude to the storm. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing they were passing over Newfoundland and would soon be starting their main transatlantic leg. It was at that moment Caroline made her move. She walked directly from the galley to the cockpit door, knocked and was admitted inside. She was in there for less than 2 minutes. When she emerged, her face was a mask of grim triumph. She walked not to Damian, but to Gregory the purser, and spoke to him in a low, urgent tone. Gregory's face paled. He looked from Caroline to Damian with a new expression, alarm. The purser approached Damian's pod for the 3rd time. This time his demeanor was grave. The entire first-class cabin, including Liz Warren, watched, sensing a critical escalation. Mr. Mercer Gregory said, his voice tight. The captain has been made aware of the situation. Ms. Finch has raised a security concern. She claims that when you were challenged, you became verbally aggressive and made what she interpreted as a veiled threat. The accusation was so ludicrous, so utterly fabricated, that Damian almost laughed. But the look on Gregory's face told him this was deadly serious. Liz was already on her feet. That is a malicious and defamatory lie, she declared, her lawyer voice now ringing through the cabin. I witnessed and recorded the entire exchange. Mr. Mercer was a model of restraint. Ms. Finch is the one who was aggressive and unprofessional. Ma'am, this is now a captain's level security issue. I'm going to have to ask you to sit down. Gregory said, his voice shaking slightly. He was in over his head. I will not sit down while your flight attendant fabricates a security threat to punish a passenger she was profiling. Liz shot back. Jalen, hearing the raised voices and the word threat, began to cry, burying his face in his father's side. That was it. The breaking point. Damian's carefully controlled patience, his monumental effort to absorb the indignity for his son's sake, shattered. The architect, the calm professional, the loving father, all of it gave way to a man pushed too far. He wasn't angry anymore. He was cold. A chilling, surgical calm washed over him. They had threatened his liberty and frightened his child. The line had been crossed. He looked at Gregory, at the panicked face of Caroline, hovering in the background, at the concerned faces of his fellow passengers. He had tried to de-escalate. He had tried to be polite. He had tried to rise above it. Now it was time to end it. He pulled Jalen close, murmuring soothing words. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out his satellite phone. The sight of it immediately silenced the cabin. It was a piece of equipment that spoke of a level of connection and power far beyond that of a typical traveler. Gregory's eyes widened. Sir, the use of satellite phones is strictly prohibited. Damian held up a hand, and the authority in the gesture was so absolute that Gregory stopped talking. Damian dialed a single number from his contacts. It rang twice. Alana, it's me, he said, his voice perfectly level. He paused, listening. I'm fine. Jalen is fine. But I'm afraid I have some bad news for Celestial Airlines. He calmly and concisely recounted the events of the last 2 hours. He left nothing out: the repeated ID checks, Caroline Finch's attitude, the fabricated security threat, the name of the purser, Gregory Price. He spoke with the precision he would use to describe a building's structural flaw. Across the aisle, Liz Warren watched her expression, a mixture of awe and anticipation. "Yes?" Damian continued into the phone. "Flight 88 to London. We're over Newfoundland right now. Yes, I have a witness. An attorney, actually." She recorded it. "I see." Caroline Finch scoffed audibly, a smirk playing on her lips. She whispered to another flight attendant. "Who's he calling his mummy?" She still believed she was in control. She believed this was just the desperate act of a man who was about to be arrested upon landing. Damian looked directly at her, a silent, chilling promise in his eyes. He spoke back into the phone. "Alana, she just called you my mummy. You might want to factor that into your response." He listened for another moment. "Yes, I understand. Do what you have to do. We'll wait." He ended the call and placed the satellite phone on his tray table. The entire first-class cabin was frozen in a state of suspended animation. "What was that?" Gregory asked, his voice barely a whisper. Damian looked at the purser, then let his gaze drift to a triumphant-looking Caroline. That he said, his voice resonating in the stillness, was my sister. Dr. Alana Mercer. You may know her as the Executive Vice President of Global Operations for Celestial's parent company, Intersky Holdings. She's the one who signs off on your entire division's budget. And she is, I believe the expression is, not pleased. The color drained from Caroline Finch's face. The smirk dissolved into a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated horror. In that instant, she understood that she had not been challenging a passenger. She had been picking a fight with the very power structure that governed her existence. The silence that followed Damian's revelation was more profound than any noise. It was a vacuum sucking the air and arrogance out of the cabin. Caroline Finch stood frozen, her face a ghastly shade of white, resembling the starched linen on the first-class tables. The name Dr. Alana Mercer echoed in the space, a name that to the upper echelons of Celestial Airlines was akin to royalty. Gregory Price looked as if he was about to be physically ill. He stared at Damian, then back at Caroline. A dawning, catastrophic understanding in his eyes. He had sided with the wrong person. He had backed a lie that was about to bring the sky down on their heads. Less than 5 minutes passed an eternity in the pressurized cabin. Then the cockpit door opened with a decisive click. The captain, a man with a weathered face and decades of command in his eyes, stepped out. He didn't look at the passengers. His gaze was locked on his purser, Gregory. "Greg, what in the hell is going on out here?" he demanded, his voice a low rumble of fury. Before Gregory could stammer out a reply, the red light on the cockpit communications panel began to flash insistently. It was a direct priority call from the ground. Only the highest levels of airline operations could trigger that kind of summons. The captain shot one more furious look at his crew and disappeared back into the cockpit. The passengers murmured amongst themselves. Liz Warren sat back down, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face. She had witnessed courtroom dramas, but this was something else entirely. This was justice delivered via satellite. Damian, for his part, remained preternaturally calm. He had passed the point of anger and was now simply an observer of the consequences he had set in motion. He focused on Jalen, who had finally stopped crying and was now watching the unfolding drama with wide, curious eyes, sensing the monumental shift in power. "Is Auntie Alana fixing it, Dad?" Jalen whispered. "Yes, champ," Damian said softly. "Auntie Alana is fixing it." The fixing came in the form of the captain's voice, but it was a voice no one on that plane had ever heard before. The usual calm, reassuring pilot's tone was gone, replaced by one of strained, barely concealed disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." He paused, and in that pause everyone knew this was not a routine announcement about turbulence. Due to an unforeseen and critical logistical issue that has just been communicated to us by our operations center in New York. I am afraid I have some rather unprecedented news. Another pause. The tension was unbearable. "We are turning the aircraft around. We will be returning to John F. Kennedy International Airport immediately. I repeat, we are reversing course and returning to New York." A collective gasp went through the entire aircraft, rippling from first class back through the unseen sections of business and economy. Phones which had been in airplane mode were furtively switched on as people tried to understand what could possibly cause a fully loaded 707 to abort an intercontinental flight 2 hours into its journey. Was it a bomb threat? A catastrophic mechanical failure? The captain wasn't finished. All flight crew will be grounded upon arrival pending a full corporate and federal review. Ground staff at JFK are being mobilized to handle deplaning and reaccommodation. We apologize for this extreme disruption to your travel plans. We will update you when we have more information. The intercom clicked off. Chaos erupted, not just in first class, but throughout the plane as the news was processed. The plane banked a slow, heavy turn back towards the west, a giant admission of defeat. But the most dramatic scene was confined to the first-class galley. Caroline Finch looked at Gregory, her eyes pleading. A logistical issue. "They can't do this." Gregory just shook his head, the reality crashing down on him. It wasn't a logistical issue, Caroline. It was a phone call. Then the final crushing blow was delivered personally. David, the kind flight attendant who had served Damian and Jalen, approached his colleagues with a tablet in his hand. He looked pale and shaken. On the screen was an official system-wide directive that had just been pushed to all crew devices. He showed it to Gregory and Caroline. Flight 88, JFK LHR. Immediate divert. Reason, passenger interference, and crew misconduct. Cat 1 incident. All cabin crew for Flight 88 are hereby suspended effective immediately. Do not report for further duty. Await contact from HR and corporate security. Caroline Finch read the words, and her legs seemed to give out from under her. She staggered back against a counter, her hand flying to her mouth. Her career, built over 15 years, had just been incinerated in mid-air. She stared at Damian, her eyes a swirling vortex of hatred, disbelief, and terror. She had tried to make him small to question his right to be there. In response, his world had reached out and erased hers. The 2-hour flight back to New York was the most surreal journey of Damian's life. He was no longer a pariah. He was the quiet center of a storm of his own making. The crew, under strict orders, was silent, their faces grim. They were ghosts on their own flight. Passengers in business and economy, getting whispers of the story from the now active internet, kept peering through the curtains into first class, trying to get a look at the man who had turned a plane around. When they landed back at JFK, it was not at a normal gate. The plane taxied to a remote stand on the tarmac, where a fleet of black cars and airport official vehicles were waiting, their lights flashing silently in the night. The jet bridge didn't connect. A set of stairs was rolled up to the door. An airline official in a sharp suit, a man Damian recognized from company photos as the director of JFK operations, boarded the plane. He ignored the crew completely. He walked directly to seat 2A. "Mr. Mercer, Dr. Mercer," he asked, his voice full of deference. Damian corrected him. "Just Mr. Mercer. This is my son, Jalen." "Of course. My deepest, most sincere apologies for what you have experienced. Your sister, Dr. Alana Mercer, has arranged for a car to take you and your son wherever you need to go. Your luggage is being expedited. We have also arranged for you to take our first flight out tomorrow morning on a private jet." Damian nodded. He looked at Liz Warren. "Can you please arrange a car for my friend and colleague, Ms. Warren, as well? Her testimony will be crucial." "Absolutely. It's already done," the official said. Damian and Jalen, led by the executive, were the first to deplane. As he stood at the top of the stairs, Damian glanced back. He saw the faces of the other passengers, confused and weary. And he saw Caroline Finch, huddled with the rest of the suspended crew, her face tear-streaked and broken. She had gambled with his dignity and lost everything. The flight had been cancelled, but her life as she knew it was over. The return to John F. Kennedy International Airport was not a landing. It was a surrender. The Boeing 707, a symbol of global connection, taxied not to the bustling international terminal, but to a desolate, remote stand used for maintenance and emergencies. Under the harsh glare of floodlights, a scene of profound corporate failure unfolded on the tarmac. Awaiting them was not a jet bridge, but a cold set of metal stairs. Awaiting the passengers were buses. Awaiting the crew were grim-faced security personnel. And awaiting Damian Mercer was a fleet of black sedans, their engines humming quietly in the night. The cabin door opened to a wave of cold, damp air. The director of JFK operations, a man whose tailored suit couldn't hide the panic in his eyes, was the first one up the stairs. His focus was singular. He walked past the suspended crew as if they were ghosts making a beeline for Damian. The apology was swift, deferential, and public enough for every remaining passenger in first class to hear. As Damian, Jalen, and a quietly observing Liz Warren were escorted down the stairs, the contrast was staggering. They were treated like visiting dignitaries, guided with hushed apologies toward a waiting Lincoln Navigator. The rest of the first-class passengers were led to a separate bus, their faces a mixture of annoyance and awe. Then the curtains to the economy cabin were pulled back, and a torrent of 200-plus weary and furious passengers began to deplane, blinking in the floodlights, completely bewildered as to why their London vacation had ended back in Queens. Shouts of, "What's going on?" and "I'm going to sue" filled the air. Damian's last glimpse as his car door closed was of Caroline Finch and Gregory Price. They weren't being escorted, they were being corralled. A security lead was speaking to them, confiscating their company IDs on the spot. Caroline's face, streaked with tears, was a portrait of utter devastation. Gregory looked like a man who had aged 20 years since takeoff. The unraveling had begun. By the time Damian was checking into a palatial suite at the St. Regis, a sanctuary arranged by his sister Alana, the story was already a Category 5 hurricane in the digital world. It started with a few confused tweets, but the true epicenter was Liz Warren. In her own suite, she ignored the champagne and macarons sent by the hotel. Instead, she opened her laptop, and with the precision of a master litigator, she composed a blog post titled "Anatomy of a Mid-Air Breakdown Profiling at 30,000 Feet." She laid out the timeline, the repeated demands, the escalation, and the fabricated threat. She didn't name Damian, referring to him only as a dignified father. But she embedded the audio file. That was the spark that ignited the inferno. By 4 a.m., The audio was on every news site. By 5 a.m., celestial shame and Hanat flying. While black were the top 2 trending topics worldwide. By the 6 a.m. market open, Intersky Holdings stock plummeted, shedding over $800 million in value in the first hour of trading. Inside the Intersky Tower, the 6 a.m. crisis meeting was a scene of controlled panic. CEO Robert Harrison, his face pale and unshaven, stood before his board. How did this happen? How did one flight attendant cause this level of brand destruction? From the conference screen, Dr. Alana Mercer's voice was ice. She didn't, Robert. You did. We did. This wasn't a spark. It was an eruption. The pressure has been building for years, and we chose to ignore it. While they argued, the mechanism of corporate justice was already grinding into motion. In the HR department, a diligent mid-level investigator named David Chen was tasked with pulling the complete personnel files for the entire Flight 88 crew. When he opened Caroline Finch's digital record, he physically recoiled. It was a litany of malfeasance. Complaint number 1, 2019. A Latino family claimed Finch refused to help them with their bags, telling them to speak English if they wanted assistance. Resolution: verbal warning. Customer given a $100 voucher. Complaint number 2, 2021. A black man in business class alleged Finch lost his meal order and served him last after every other passenger. Resolution: written reprimand. Finch claimed it was a simple mistake. Complaint number 3, 2022. 2 Indian men were accused by Finch of acting suspiciously and were subjected to a seat search by the purser. Nothing was found. Resolution: complaint dismissed. Finch commended for vigilance. There were 4 more. 7 in total. Each one a red flag. Each one systematically downgraded, explained away, or buried by a senior HR manager who was a close friend of Finch's. David Chen felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a file. It was a cover-up. He saw the signature of his own boss on the dismissal of the last complaint. The rot was deep. Meanwhile, Gregory Price was living his final moments as a celestial employee. He sat in a sterile, windowless office opposite 2 corporate lawyers. Your failure to de-escalate your complicity in advancing a false security claim and your gross mismanagement of your crew constitute a fireable offense, one lawyer droned. However, in light of your 30 years of service, we are prepared to offer you the option to resign effective immediately. You'll keep a portion of your pension provided you sign this non-disclosure agreement. Gregory didn't even read it. His career, his identity was gone. He had followed the wrong protocol, trusted the wrong person. He signed his name, handed over the tarnished wings from his lapel, and walked out of the building a civilian, his 30 years of loyalty erased in 30 minutes. Back in his office, David Chen wrestled with his conscience. He knew that if he just passed the file up the chain, the friendly supervisor would help the corporation contain it. They would sacrifice Finch, but the system itself, the culture of protecting their own, would remain. He thought of the audio clip he'd heard on the news, the sound of the little boy's voice. He picked up his personal cell phone and dialed the number of an investigative reporter he knew from a previous corporate whistleblower case. "You're not going to believe what I'm looking at," David whispered. "The airline Karen everyone is talking about. The company knew. They knew for years. That leak blew the last of the containment doors off. By noon, new headlines were screaming, 'Celestial HR, buried years of bias complaints, against flight attendant. The story was no longer about one rogue employee. It was about deep institutional corruption. The CEO's initial apology now looked like a lie. In the quiet sanctuary of the St. Regis, Damian watched the news, his arm around Jalen. His son wasn't watching the screen. He was watching his father. "Are they still talking about us, Dad?" Jalen asked. Damian looked at the images of chaos, the plummeting stock charts, the angry pundits. He had simply demanded to be treated with dignity. The unraveling that followed was not his creation. It was the inevitable collapse of a structure that had been rotten for a very, very long time. "Yes, son," Damian said softly. "But they're not just talking about us. They're finally listening. The castles of England, with their ancient stones and silent histories of conquest and resilience, were a strange and fitting backdrop for Damian's thoughts. He and Jalen explored the Tower of London, walked the ramparts of Windsor, and gazed at ruins that had stood for 1,000 years. But Damian saw it all through a new lens. These structures were testaments to power, to lines being drawn and defended. He had just fought his own battle, drawn his own line, not in stone, but in the sterile, pressurized air of a 787. The victory felt necessary, but the joy of the trip, the pure, unadulterated excitement he had planned for his son, had been irrevocably altered. The world had intruded. Upon their return to New York, the true final act of the drama began. It didn't play out on cable news, but in the sterile quiet of the 50th floor boardroom at Intersky Holdings. It was a space designed to project unassailable power, with a table of polished obsidian that seemed to stretch for a mile and a view that swallowed Manhattan whole. At one end sat CEO Robert Harrison, flanked by a team of ashen-faced lawyers. At the other sat Damian Liz Warren, and dialing in via a giant wall-sized screen, Dr. Alana Mercer. Her presence, even digital, filled the room. Robert Harrison began with a practiced, somber tone. "Mr. Mercer, on behalf of the entire company, I want to offer my most profound apology. What you and your son endured is inexcusable. We have terminated Ms. Finch and her supervisor, and we are prepared to offer you a significant monetary settlement for the distress caused." Liz Warren didn't even let the offer hang in the air. She slid a thick binder across the table. "We're not here for your money, Mr. Harrison. We're here for your penance." The CEO's lawyers shifted uneasily. Liz's voice was calm, but it held the sharp, precise threat of litigation that could cripple them for years. Your company didn't have a bad apple. You had a rotten orchard. Caroline Finch's file, which we subpoenaed, shows 7 prior complaints for discriminatory behavior. 7. Your HR department buried them. Your supervisors ignored them. You are not just liable for her actions. You are liable for your own systemic, willful negligence. The audio I recorded, which the FAA now possesses, is damning. The testimony of the other first-class passengers is uniform. We don't need to go to court, but trust me, we will own this company if we do. Damian spoke next, and his voice silenced the legal posturing. It was the voice of a father. "I make my living designing buildings, Mr. Harrison. Before you pour a foundation, you test the soil." You look for weaknesses for instability. Your company's soil is poisoned. You built $1 billion brand on it, and it nearly collapsed because you were too arrogant to look at what was right beneath your feet. I watched my 8-year-old son cry because he thought he did something wrong just by existing in a space I had paid for him to be in. Your money can't erase that memory. Only meaningful structural change can even begin to address the damage. From the screen, Alana Mercer delivered the final blow. "Robert," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is not a negotiation. This is the new reality. My brother and my friend, Ms. Warren, have outlined a series of non-negotiable reforms. We are calling it the Mercer Accord. You will sign it today, or by noon, my letter of resignation will be on your desk, and my first call will be to the New York Times. I will not be part of a company that protects its bigots over its passengers' family war." Checkmate. Harrison, trapped between a PR apocalypse, a devastating lawsuit, and a rebellion from his most effective executive, capitulated completely. The Mercer Accord was implemented with brutal efficiency. The multi-million-dollar settlement was paid directly into a trust to form the Jalen Mercer Foundation for Travelers' Rights, with Liz Warren as its chair. It soon became a powerful watchdog, a beacon for others who faced similar injustice. Within a year, the foundation had successfully represented a Muslim family, kicked off a flight for speaking Arabic, and an elderly woman in a wheelchair left stranded at a gate by a neglectful crew. Damian's pain was being transformed into other people's power. At Celestial Airlines, the Accord was a cultural earthquake. The new mandatory training simulations were legendarily intense. Flight attendants were put into scenarios where they faced actors playing passengers from every conceivable background, their own biases and snap judgments exposed under the harsh lights of a mock cabin. Many veteran employees, comfortable in their old ways, quit. The cost of retraining and hiring new, more empathetic staff was astronomical. The airline lost the lucrative U.S. government travel contract, citing the unacceptable risk of civil rights violations demonstrated by the Flight 88 incident. The brand, once a symbol of luxury, was now a case study in failure at Harvard Business School. For Caroline Finch, karma was not a lightning bolt, but a slow, creeping tide. After being fired, she found herself in a vortex of public hatred. She changed her number, deleted her social media, sold her house at a loss, and moved to a nondescript town in Ohio, seeking the solace of anonymity. She took a job as a cashier at a 24-hour convenience store, the night shift, where faces were fleeting and conversation was minimal. One night, a year after the incident, 2 young men came in to buy energy drinks. The news was playing on a small TV behind the counter, a year in review segment. Suddenly, Caroline heard the anchor's voice, a story that gripped the nation when a single father's phone call grounded an entire 777. Her own face, a contemptuous sneer captured by a passenger's phone, flashed on the screen. The 2 young men glanced at the TV, then at her. One of them squinted. "Hey, don't I know you from somewhere?" Caroline's blood ran cold. She fumbled their change, her hands shaking. "No," she whispered, her eyes cast down. "I just have one of those faces." She was a ghost, haunted not by spirits but by her own reflection, forever trapped in the amber of her worst moment. 2 years after the flight to nowhere, Damian and Jalen were at JFK again. They were flying to Tokyo to see the cherry blossoms. As they walked through the terminal, a handsome black pilot captain's stripes on his shoulders stopped in front of them. "Excuse me," he said, his eyes on Damian. "You're Damian Mercer, aren't you?" Damian nodded cautiously. The pilot broke into a wide, genuine smile. "I just wanted to shake your hand. My name is Captain Evans. I fly for a rival airline. What you did, it changed things for all of us. The memos, the new training, the way they look at us now. It's different. It's better. You took the hit, but you made the skies a little friendlier for the rest of us. Thank you." The encounter left Damian deeply moved. He was no longer a victim or a symbol. He was part of a community. On the plane, a new airline, a new crew. The lead flight attendant, a Japanese woman with a serene presence, knelt by 10-year-old Jalen's seat. "Jalen-san," she said softly, "I read that you love to draw. We have a special sketchbook and pens for you, a gift from our airline. We hope you will draw many beautiful things on your trip." As the plane ascended, banking over the city, Damian looked at his son. Jalen was already lost in his new sketchbook, a look of pure, untroubled concentration on his face. The view outside the window was of a world of infinite possibility. The ugly scar of Flight 88 would always be a part of their story, a reminder of the world's capacity for prejudice. But it was no longer the defining chapter. It was the foundation tested and proven strong upon which a new story was being built, one of resilience, integrity, and the simple, profound power of a father who refused to let anyone dim his son's light. The karma wasn't just hard, it was restorative. And as he watched his son draw, Damian Mercer knew, with a certainty that filled his soul, that they were finally flying in the right direction. The story of Damian Mercer and Celestial Flight 88 is a stark reminder that sometimes the most powerful stand we can take is to simply demand the dignity we are owed. It shows how one person's refusal to be diminished can trigger a tidal wave of consequences, exposing the systemic flaws hidden beneath a corporate smile. This wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about a culture that allowed her prejudice to fester. The hard karma that followed wasn't just about revenge. It was about rebuilding. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that accountability is crucial and that everyone deserves to travel with respect, please help us share this message. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with your friends and family to spread awareness and, most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas where justice prevails. What are your thoughts on how the airline handled it? Let us know in the comments below.